Captain Sisko's darkest Star Trek Deep Space Nine episode was built on another character's lies. When Star Trek Deep Space Nine set out to tell darker, more morally complex stories than its predecessors, it found the perfect character to embody those shades of gray in Captain Benjamin Sisko. Commanding a space station on the edge of a volatile war zone, Sisko routinely faced choices that wouldn't have been out of place in a political thriller rather than a utopian sci-fi series. But no episode pushed him further into moral ambiguity than Season 6 in the Pale Moonlight. For many fans, this is the definitive Sisko episode, the one that cemented him as Star Trek's most complex captain. But what's often overlooked is that the moral weight Sisko carries in that story rests entirely on a foundation of deception, and that deception didn't originate with Sisko himself. It came from another character's carefully constructed lies. Without them, the entire scheme would have collapsed, and the Dominion War might have taken an entirely different turn. The context: a war that was going badly. By the time In the Pale Moonlight takes place, the Dominion War was turning into a disaster for the Federation. Casualty reports kept piling up. Systems were falling to Dominion control. The Klingon Empire, the Federation's uneasy ally, was stretched thin. The Romulans, the galaxy's other great power, had chosen to remain neutral, leaving the Federation and Klingons to face the Dominion and its Cardassian allies alone. This was the reality weighing on Sisko when he realized something critical. Unless the Romulans joined the war on the Federation side, the Dominion might actually win. Outnumbered and outmaneuvered, Starfleet would eventually be forced into a surrender or armistice on Dominion terms. Sisko, ever the realist, understood that his moral convictions would mean little in a galaxy ruled by the Dominion's authoritarian rule. Thus, a new idea was born, one that would lead him to his darkest personal compromise. The plan: convince the Romulans by any means necessary. Sisko's initial thought was simple: persuade the Romulans that the Dominion was planning to attack them, and they'd enter the war to protect themselves. Unfortunately, there was no evidence to support this claim. The Dominion's leadership, particularly Wayan and the female changeling, were far too cautious to tip their hand. So Sisko turned to someone who could create the illusion of evidence: Alan Garrick, the former Cardassian spy turned tailor, whose own moral flexibility made him both dangerous and invaluable. Garrick didn't just lie, he crafted lies into weapons. His years in the Obsidian Order had taught him how to make a forgery so convincing it could rewrite history. Sisko may have been the one to propose bringing the Romulans into the war, but Garrick would be the architect of the deception that made it possible. The lie: a forged Dominion plot. Garrick's solution was to create a piece of undeniable proof, a holographic data rod supposedly recovered from Cardassia, showing Dominion leaders plotting an attack against Romulus. To do this, he needed an authentic Cardassian data rod and a master forger capable of manipulating it with such precision that even Romulan intelligence experts would be fooled. The genius and danger of Garrick's lie was that it didn't just create evidence. It created an entire alternate reality in which the Romulans were already doomed unless they acted. This wasn't a misinterpretation or a doctored report. It was an elaborate fiction, complete with visual confirmation, verbal orders, and enough detail to make skepticism seem irrational. And Sisko, desperate to save lives, agreed to it. The price of the lie: bribes, deals, and more lies. Once Sisko brought Garrick into the plan, he became complicit in a chain of compromises. Bribes were paid to acquire the data rod. Promises were made to criminals and shady dealers in exchange for their cooperation. Starfleet funds were spent with no accountability. Sisko, the man who once gave speeches about the Federation's moral superiority, found himself negotiating with black market traders and looking the other way when laws were bent, broken, or obliterated. This gradual descent is what makes In the Pale Moonlight so compelling. At first, Sisko tries to tell himself he's still operating within acceptable moral limits. But Garrick's scheme keeps requiring just a little bit more: another compromise, another crime, another secret. By the time the forgery is complete, Sisko has already stepped far outside the Federation's moral comfort zone. And yet, the darkest part of Garrick's deception was still to come. The twist: Garrick lies to Sisko to What makes this episode truly remarkable is that Sisko himself becomes a victim of Garrick's manipulation. Sisko believes the plan is to deliver the fake evidence to Senator Vreenek, a high-ranking Romulan official, and let him take it back to Romulus. The hope is that the forged recording will convince the Romulan Senate to join the war. But when Vreenek arrives at Deep Space Nine, he spots the forgery almost immediately. "It's a fake," he tells Sisko in one of DS9's most famous moments. With the plan seemingly in ruins, Sisko resigns himself to failure. Except Garrick never intended for the forgery to be perfect. His real plan, which he never shared with Sisko, was far darker: assassinate Vreenek in such a way that the Romulans would blame the Dominion, and then plant the forgery among the wreckage so it would be discovered posthumously. Once Vreenek was dead, there would be no one to testify to the forger's flaws. The Romulan government, enraged by what appeared to be an assassination plot and invasion plan, would have no choice but to join the war. That's exactly what happened. Sisko's moral collapse. When Sisko learns the truth, he's horrified. Garrick had arranged for the assassination without his consent. Two men, the forger and Vreenek, were dead because of this plan. And yet, the Romulans had joined the war just as he'd hoped. Billions of Federation citizens might now survive because of these deaths. It's here that the full weight of Garrick's deception becomes clear. Garrick didn't just lie to the Romulans, he lied to Sisko, manipulating him into a position where he couldn't undo the plan without destroying the outcome they both wanted. By keeping Sisko ignorant of the assassination plot until it was too late, Garrick ensured that the captain's hands were just as dirty as his own. And Sisko accepts it. He delivers the episode's haunting closing monologue, admitting that he can live with what happened. Because he must. Why Garrick's lies made the story work. In the Pale Moonlight is remembered as Sisko's moral reckoning, but it's Garrick's duplicity that makes it possible. Without Garrick's willingness to manipulate friend and foe alike, Sisko would never have crossed so many ethical lines. Garrick built the House of Cards, and Sisko, however reluctantly, lived in it. Garrick's lies also serve as a thematic mirror for the larger state of the galaxy in DS9's later seasons. The Dominion War was a conflict where idealism was a liability, and survival often depended on secrecy, subterfuge, and compromise. In a way, Garrick's manipulation of Sisko mirrors how the war manipulated the Federation as a whole, pulling it into actions that would have been unthinkable in peacetime. The episode's legacy, In the Pale Moonlight, remains one of Star Trek's most celebrated episodes precisely because it refuses to offer a clean resolution. Sisko wins, but he also loses something in the process, a piece of himself, and perhaps a measure of faith in the Federation's ideals. Garrick's lies achieved their intended goal, but at the cost of lives, trust, and the moral high ground. Why?